Welcome to the debate. In 1958, there was an administration that possessed this absolutely unified, unquestioned power. And they ordered their citizens to go out and kill every single sparrow in the country.
Right, the Four Pests campaign.
Exactly. And, the rationale was actually pretty simple. Sparrows eat grain, so eliminating them would protect the crops. And it was this massive, incredibly fast, highly coordinated nationwide effort.
But there was a pretty glaring oversight.
A massive oversight, yeah, because sparrows also eat insects. So without the friction of dissent to basically warn the leadership of this looming ecological disaster, the insects just multiplied. The crops failed, and millions of people starved.
It's just a grim historical reminder, honestly.
Yeah. It shows that raw political speed. When you strip away the brakes of rational debate, it can basically drive an entire nation off a cliff.
Right, but let's flip the scenario to the modern day, because I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
Okay.
Imagine a city that desperately needs a new hospital. The funding is there, the blueprints are drawn, but because the system guarantees every single dissenting voice the absolute power to object.
Oh, the zoning issues.
Exactly. The project spends, 15 years trapped in environmental reviews, community board appeals, endless litigation. And by the time the first shovel actually hits the dirt, the cost is quadrupled.
Sure, it gets expensive.
Accommodation of every dissenting voice. It might not drive off a cliff, but it rarely leaves the parking lot.
And right there, that is the exact heart of our discussion today. We are pulling apart the fundamental tensions in democratic governance.
Drawing directly from the framework in Visions of the Republic, a dialogue across eras.
Right. We're grappling with these two deeply contrasting philosophies of statecraft to answer one specific question. Does the true path of a republic lie in prioritizing rational thought, pluralism, and the uncompromising protection of individual liberty?
Even when progress is slow and messy.
Exactly. Or, on the flip side, must a republic prioritize decisive leadership, cultural unity, and rapid developmental outcomes to, actually serve its people?
Survive solely on the theoretical promises of a constitution and just endless deliberation.
You think it gets bogged down?
Completely. People require development, they require physical security and dignity. So I will argue that while protecting a wide diversity of thought is noble, a constantly divided nation simply struggles to act. Strong, unified leadership is what actually inspires confidence, builds infrastructure, and moves a nation forward.
Right.
Governance isn't just a philosophical exercise in liberty, right? It's an urgent mechanism for delivering real-world outcomes.
Well, and I am taking the stance that democracy is, at its absolute foundation, a system of ideas. A republic isn't just an administrative apparatus designed to pave roads and hit GDP targets.
But it has to do those things.
It does, but it is primarily a profound moral promise to protect diversity, freedom, and rational thought. True national strength just cannot come at the cost of individual liberty.
I hear you, but...
Let me just finish this thought. A democracy must actively encourage questioning and dissent. If a state prioritizes raw power or rapid consensus over the rigorous examination of ideas, it becomes dangerously rigid. It loses the flexibility of thought required to course correct.
Okay, let's actually dig into that idea of course correction and flexibility. Because you opened with the sparrow example, which perfectly highlights the danger of authoritarian blindness. Sure.
Right.
But let's talk about the mechanism of how a republic actually handles disagreement today. If you've ever wondered why your local government takes 10 years to build a single subway line, this exact tension is why.
The environmental reviews, the community input.
Yes. When you design a system to overprotect the weakest voice, you inadvertently create what's called a vetocracy. It's a system where a tiny minority can basically veto the needs of the majority.
See, I wouldn't call it a vetocracy. I would actually call it a political immune system.
An immune system? How so?
Think about how a biological immune system works, right? When a foreign body enters, the immune system reacts. It causes friction, it causes a fever.
Sure.
And it's uncomfortable, yes. But that fever is the mechanism by which the body identifies and fights off fatal systemic errors. Dissent in a republic functions exactly the same way. The delays in the debates, they are the fever. They force bad ideas into the light.
Wait, an immune system is a great analogy. But you're completely ignoring what happens when an immune system goes into overdrive.
You mean an autoimmune disease?
Exactly. The body starts attacking its own healthy tissue. And that is exactly what happens in a hyper-pluralistic system that is obsessed with accommodating every single grievance. The state attacks its own ability to function.
But is it attacking itself?
You have infrastructure decaying, you have systemic poverty, but the state is paralyzed because someone somewhere filed an injunction. Governance requires scale and determination to actually uplift marginalized voices, not just, provide a microphone for them to broadcast their suffering.
Yeah, I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Because uplifting them through top-down, unquestioned directives, that strips them with agency. You're basically replacing their voice with the state's benevolence.
I wouldn't call it benevolence, it's just action.
But the moment you bypass that autoimmune friction, as you call it, you are empowering a central authority to decide what is best for the weakest voice without requiring their ongoing consent. Mechanically, how does a decisive leader even know what the people need if they dismantle the avenues of dissent?
Well, they look at the material conditions.
But do they get accurate data? In rigid systems, subordinates are terrified to deliver bad news, so they feed the executive fake data. The crops are failing, but the paperwork says we have a surplus. Dissent isn't just a moral right. It is the only reliable data-gathering mechanism a state has.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. I'm not advocating for a system where subordinates lie out of fear. I'm pointing out that the data gathering has to eventually stop, and the pouring of concrete has to begin.
Of course. Eventually.
Let's look at the actual mechanism of poverty alleviation. If you spend decades protecting the right of a destitute citizen to legally challenge a housing development,
Which is their right.
right? But if you lack the decisive leadership to actually build the housing that pulls them out of poverty, what has your democracy achieved? You have given them the liberty to remain homeless. A starving citizen does not care about the philosophical purity of the debate. They care about material reality.
But you can't decouple material reality from philosophical purity, because the moment the state has the unchecked power to rapidly bulldoze a neighborhood to build that housing,
It gets built faster.
yeah, but it also has the power to bulldoze their specific home without fair compensation. Rights are what ensure that when the state moves fast, it doesn't crush the people at the bottom.
I hear that, I really do. But let's follow the thread of what you need to actually execute massive society-wide projects without relying purely on top-down force.
Okay, what do you need?
You need extreme social trust. And this brings us right to the question of national identity in the text. If a republic is going to act decisively, to build, to reform, to defend itself, the citizens have to trust each other.
Sure, trust is essential.
And trust does not come from a sterile, secular constitution. It comes from deep civilizational roots.
Oh, wow. I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the second you make religion or heritage part of the state's official identity, you're automatically drawing a line in the sand.
Not necessarily a line of exclusion, just a foundation.
It is exclusion, though. You're telling a whole segment of your population, you live here, but you aren't really one of us. In the vision of the republic I am defending, the nation's soul has to be grounded in pluralism. We are talking about massive tapestries of diverse religions, cultures, and languages.
Right.
So to maintain unity across that kind of diversity, the framework of the state must be completely secular. Spiritualism is deeply personal, it's not political.
That's a compelling argument. But have you considered that you can't just separate culture from the public square like it's a math equation?
Why not? The state should be neutral.
Because it doesn't work that way in human psychology. You are assuming people are merely rational actors operating in a purely administrative state. But human beings require meaning, our shared heritage, our myths, our traditions. These are the psychological engines that bind us in ways that abstract constitutional principles simply cannot.
But our heritage is almost always code for the heritage of the majority.
That's a bit cynical.
No, it's historical reality. When a leader invokes civilizational roots to accelerate development, they are essentially saying, we are going to move fast and we are going to do it according to the cultural norms of the dominant group.
It's about finding common ground.
But it's incredibly dangerous.
A forward-looking democracy relies on reason, scientific inquiry, and universal human rights to solve modern problems, precisely because reason creates a neutral space.
Okay, but
In a rational republic, an immigrant who arrived yesterday has the exact same standing in the public square as someone whose ancestors lived there for 1,000 years.
yes, legally. But a completely neutral space doesn't inspire a nation to build, to sacrifice, or to endure hardship. Look at any major national crisis.
Okay.
When a nation is attacked, or when it has to endure a decade of severe economic restructuring, leaders don't rally the public by reading sections of the tax code or citing the philosophical neutrality of the state.
Well, obviously not the tax code.
They invoke the homeland. They invoke shared history. I completely reject the premise that leaning into the past is a limitation. The past empowers the future. A shared cultural pride lowers the transaction costs of governance. When people feel they are part of a shared civilizational story, they are far more willing to compromise and push forward together.
The danger of using cultural pride as your political engine is that it burns incredibly hot, and it easily consumes the minority cultures within the republic.
It doesn't have to consume them.
Yes, it lowers the transaction costs of governance because you simply silence the people who don't fit the narrative. I mean, it's highly efficient to build a society if you only have to consult one demographic. But that efficiency comes at the cost of true pluralism.
It doesn't mean silencing minorities. It means acknowledging that a nation isn't just a random assortment of individuals who happen to live within the same geographic borders. There is a gravity to a nation.
A gravity?
Yes. And ignoring that gravity doesn't make a republic more modern. It makes it hollow. You don't have to choose between a scientific future and a proud heritage. But if you disconnect politics from culture entirely, you lose the emotional engine that actually drives human progress.
Well, I would argue that losing that specific emotional engine is entirely necessary to preserve the system itself. And this kind of shifts us toward how we actually measure the success of a republic.
Okay, let's talk about metrics.
I firmly defend the necessity of idealism in governance. Without a rigorous commitment to ideals, to the absolute philosophical promise of freedom, equal protection, and rational thought, politics devolves into a purely transactional exercise.
What do you mean by transactional in this context?
I mean the pursuit of power for the sake of power, just disguised as pragmatism. It's the idea of the social contract reduced to a vending machine.
A vending machine.
Yeah! If the only metric for democratic success is delivering results, then the state will inevitably justify crushing civil liberties, silencing journalists, or overriding the courts as long as the trains run on time and the GDP goes up. But pure pragmatism entirely abandons the moral core of the republic. Democracy isn't just a delivery service for economic goods.
I have to challenge that completely. Idealism is a luxury of the comfortable.
A luxury?
Absolutely. You warn against politics becoming transactional, but what is a democracy if not a grand transaction between the governed and the governors?
It's a mutual agreement on rights.
Yes, but practically speaking, the people grant the state a monopoly on violence and taxation, and in exchange, the state must deliver tangible, measurable changes in their lives.
But if you lose the idealism, you have lost the democracy, even if the citizens are wealthy. Let's look at the mechanics of democratic backsliding. How do democracies actually die in the modern era?
Usually through institutional decay.
Right. It's rarely a military coup anymore. It happens when an executive says, "Look at all this gridlock. Look at how slow the legislature is. Give me emergency powers and I will fix the economy."
And sometimes they do fix it.
And the public, exhausted by the friction of pluralism, agrees. But once those rights are surrendered for the sake of efficiency, they are almost never returned. The state becomes legitimate only as long as the economy booms.
And what happens when a hyper-pluralistic democracy fails to provide basic infrastructure and security for 20 years? It loses its legitimacy just as fast.
Well,
You are deeply worried about an executive taking too much power, but you need to look at the other side of the ledger. Dreams and ideals are beautiful, but people judge a democracy by the food on their table, the security of their borders, and the dignity of their standing in the world. They do not judge it by the rhetorical elegance of its political speeches.
it is not about rhetorical elegance. It is about the mechanism of survival.
If you prioritize immediate results over democratic processes, you erode the very institutions that ensure those results benefit everyone fairly. A process isn't just red tape. The process is the governance.
The process is a tool, not a religion. Let's go back to the hospital example.
Okay, the 15-year hospital.
Right. If the committee sits in a room for a decade debating the secular and rational properties of the steel, ensuring that every single mathematical theory is perfectly aligned with the ideals of the blueprints, while the citizens remain sick and untreated, at some point, the debate has to end. The concrete must be poured.
Of course.
Results matter above all, because results are what actually alleviate human suffering.
And my counter to that is simple. If that committee stops debating and hastily pours the concrete using flawed materials just to satisfy the immediate public demand for action, the hospital will collapse under its own weight, killing the very citizens it was meant to serve. The slow, careful consideration of all voices is what prevents systemic collapse.
I think we have clearly mapped the boundaries of this divide pretty well.
Yeah, I agree.
To summarize my stance based on the source text, democracy is fundamentally a balance between roots and reform. It cannot exist merely as a sterile, theoretical exercise in rights. It relies on deep civilizational pride to unify the populace, and it requires scale, speed, and decisive action to deliver real, measurable change.
Right.
A republic fulfills its promise not just by protecting people's right to complain, but by empowering them through tangible, material development.
And to summarize where my position rests, democracy is a constant, incredibly delicate balance of thought. It relies on reason, secular pluralism, and the uncompromising defense of individual liberty to prevent the state from descending into rigid authoritarianism. It is only through protecting that crucial, sometimes maddening friction of dissent that a nation truly secures its future.
Yet despite this profound philosophical clash between thought and action, the source material reveals significant points of convergence.
It really does.
Both of these perspectives at their core share a deep-seated belief that the republic must endure. We are both ultimately dedicated to serving the people.
Exactly. The disagreement isn't about whether to serve the citizens, but how best to serve them. Do we achieve the highest good by protecting their freedom to dissent and maintaining the ideological purity of the system, or by systematically uplifting them through determined, culturally grounded governance?
It highlights just how complex the reality of statecraft is. There is no mathematical formula to solve a republic. It is a constant, daily negotiation between the ideals we aspire to and the physical reality we actually must build.
Democracy is clearly not a destination you finally arrive at. It is an ongoing journey shaped equally by rigorous, unrelenting ideas, decisive leadership, and the shifting needs of the people themselves.
Beautifully put.
We will leave it to our listeners to consider how both of these visions continually shape the true path of a republic. As you look at the structure of your own society, whether it's a new hospital going up in your city or a new law being debated in your capital, you have to ask yourself, are you safer because of the unyielding, rapid strength of the builders, or because of the constant, invisible friction of the immune system protecting the whole body? Thank you for joining us.